The midday sun bathed the city streets in a golden glow as people bustled about, each lost in their own world. Amid the clamor of honking cars and hurried footsteps, a man in his 40s stood on the corner of a busy intersection, his dark glasses and folded cane marking him as blind. Beside him sat a golden retriever, calm and composed, with a harness strapped securely around his body. The dog's soft fur glistened under the sunlight, but its intelligent eyes scanned the surroundings with unwavering focus. Together, they painted a picture of quiet resilience against the chaos around them. The man, whose name was Samuel, was no stranger to navigating the city's challenges. Born with perfect vision, he had lost his sight in an accident years ago, a twist of fate that had reshaped his life. But Samuel had found a lifeline in Max, his guide dog, whose loyalty and remarkable intuition were unmatched. The pair had an unspoken bond, a connection forged through trust, patience, and countless shared experiences. As Samuel waited for the light to change, Max stood alert, his ears twitching every sound. The dog had a unique ability to anticipate danger, a skill honed by years of specialized training. Pedestrians passed by, some offering polite smiles, while others barely noticed the duo. But neither Samuel nor Max sought attention. They simply sought to move through the world with quiet dignity. That tranquility, however, was about to shatter. A loud, aggressive roar pierced the air as a motorbike screeched to a stop nearby. Heads turned as the biker revved the engine, a young man clad in a leather jacket, his helmet reflecting the glaring sun. His body language exuded arrogance, and his posture suggested he was spoiling for trouble. He glanced at Samuel, then at Max, his eyes narrowing. Samuel, unaware of the biker's gaze, reached down to gently pat Max's head. "Good boy," he murmured, his voice calm. Max's tail wagged slightly, but his attention remained fixed on the surroundings. The biker, however, wasn't done making an impression. As if to assert dominance over the situation, he revved the engine louder, the sound echoing like a taunt. When that didn't elicit the reaction he wanted, he swung his leg off the bike and approached Samuel and Max. His heavy boots clicked against the pavement, a deliberate noise meant to announce his presence. "Hey," he said loudly, startling Samuel. "You and your mutt taking up too much space here." Samuel turned his head slightly, his expression neutral. "I'm just waiting for the light," he replied evenly, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. The biker sneered, clearly unimpressed. "Dogs shouldn't be on these busy streets. They're a nuisance," he spat, looking down at Max. His tone was laced with disdain, but it wasn't just the words. It was the way he stood, the way he loomed, that sent an undercurrent of unease rippling through the moment. Max, ever vigilant, took a step closer to Samuel, his posture protective. The golden retriever's calm demeanor hadn't wavered, but there was a subtle shift in his stance, a readiness that hinted at his instincts. "Your dog got nothing to say for himself," the biker mocked, stepping even closer. Before Samuel could respond, the man's boot lashed out, aiming a quick, harsh kick at Max's side. The force wasn't enough to cause serious harm, but it was enough to make Max flinch and yelp softly. Gasps erupted from nearby pedestrians. A woman covered her mouth in shock. "What is wrong with you?" someone shouted, but the biker ignored them, his smirk widening. Samuel stiffened. "What did you just do?" he asked, his voice low but laced with controlled fury. Before the biker could answer, something shifted in the air. Max, still calm, but no longer passive, let out a deep, rumbling growl, a sound no one would have expected from the usually gentle retriever. The change was startling, almost chilling. People nearby instinctively stepped back, their murmurs growing louder. The biker, momentarily taken aback, hesitated. "What's your dog's problem?" he muttered, trying to mask his sudden unease. Samuel, his hand resting firmly on Max's harness, leaned forward slightly. "You don't know what you've just done," he said, his voice eerily calm. There was no anger in his tone, only a quiet intensity that carried the weight of unspoken history. The biker scoffed, but his bravado was starting to crack. "It's just a dog," he said, though his words sounded less certain now. Max, still growling softly, took a deliberate step forward, his intelligent eyes locked on the man who had dared to harm him. There was something in that gaze, something almost human in its depth. And for the first time, the biker looked truly nervous. "You don't understand," Samuel said, his grip tightening on the harness. "Max isn't just a guide dog. He has a past you wouldn't believe if I told you." The biker snorted, though the sound was more strained than before. "What? He's some kind of superhero dog." Samuel's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "You could say that," he replied. "But you'll find out soon enough. And when you do, you'll regret ever crossing him." The tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. All eyes were on Max, the unassuming guide dog who now seemed anything but ordinary. And as the seconds ticked by, the biker's smirk faltered completely, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. What secrets did this dog hold? The answer, it seemed, was about to change everything. The biker shifted uncomfortably, his confidence evaporating as Max's growl deepened. It was unlike any sound one might expect from a dog like him. There was no bark, no frantic energy, just an ominous resonance that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. Even the onlookers, pedestrians who moments ago had been passive observers, were now transfixed, sensing that this was no ordinary encounter. Samuel's grip on Max's harness remained steady, his blind eyes fixed in the direction of the biker. His calm exterior belied the storm brewing within. While Samuel couldn't see the biker's growing unease, he could feel it. The man's erratic breathing, the slight shuffle of his boots against the pavement, and the faint quiver in his voice gave it all away. "You should walk away," Samuel said quietly. There was no malice in his tone, but there was an undeniable weight to his words, a warning, not a threat. The biker glanced around, searching for support from the crowd. But the audience wasn't on his side. Whispers floated through the air, fragments of outrage and disbelief. "Who does that to a guide dog?" "That poor man and his dog. Someone should call the police." The biker's bravado cracked further as he noticed the glares directed his way. Still, pride kept him rooted in place. He tried to laugh it off, though the sound came out hollow. "What's the big deal? It's just a mutt. You're acting like I kicked some kind of war hero." At that moment, Samuel's lips pressed into a thin line. Max, still growling softly, stood his ground. It wasn't just defiance in the dog's posture. It was something deeper, something primal. "You're not wrong," Samuel said, breaking the silence. "Max is a hero, but not the kind you're thinking of." The biker frowned, confused and irritated. What's that supposed to mean? Samuel took a slow, steady breath, his fingers brushing Max's fur for comfort. "Max wasn't always a guide dog," he began. His voice, though calm, carried a gravity that immediately drew the crowd's attention. "Before he came into my life, he served in ways you can't imagine. He's seen things that would make most people crumble. And he's done things that saved lives at great cost to himself." The biker rolled his eyes, trying to mask his unease with sarcasm. "Oh great, he's a secret agent now." But Samuel didn't flinch at the mockery. Instead, he continued, his tone unwavering. "Max was a military dog, a canine trained for search and rescue, bomb detection, and combat situations. He served in some of the most dangerous zones in the world, places where every step could mean life or death. And he wasn't just good at his job, he was exceptional." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, a mix of surprise and curiosity. Even those who had been ready to walk away now lingered, captivated by the unfolding story. "You're joking," the biker muttered, though his voice lacked the conviction it had moments ago. Samuel shook his head. "I'm not. Max was part of a unit stationed overseas. He saved dozens of lives during his service. Soldiers, civilians, children. He brought them all home when no one else could. And he paid a price for it." The biker's gaze flicked to Max, who had stopped growling but now stood perfectly still, his intelligent eyes locked on the man before him. There was something haunting about the dog's expression, as if he understood every word Samuel was saying. "He was injured during his last mission," Samuel continued. Shrapnel from an explosion nearly ended his life. They told me he fought to stay conscious, even after he was hurt, just so he could guide his team to safety. After that, he was retired from service. They said he'd earned his rest. Samuel's hand moved to stroke Max's neck, but rest didn't suit him. He needed a purpose. That's when he came to me. The biker shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable. So what? He's a retired military dog. Big deal. Doesn't mean he's some kind of superhero. Samuel tilted his head slightly, as if considering the words. You're right, he said after a pause. Max doesn't see himself as a hero. But to the people he saved, the soldiers who got to go home to their families because of him, he's more than that. He's a miracle. The biker opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a voice from the crowd. Is that true? A woman asked, stepping forward. She was in her late 30s, her kind eyes fixed on Max. Was he really in the military? Samuel nodded. Every word. The woman crouched slightly, her voice softening as she addressed Max. You're a brave boy, aren't you? She said. Max responded with a gentle wag of his tail, his demeanor instantly shifting from protective to friendly. The biker watched the interaction, his confidence crumbling further. He glanced around, hoping for an ally among the onlookers, but all he found were disapproving stares. Look, he said defensively, I didn't know. How was I supposed to know the dog had some? Heroic past or whatever. Samuel's expression hardened. You didn't know because you didn't bother to care. You saw a blind man and his dog and decided we were easy targets. But let me tell you something. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low but firm. Max has faced down dangers far worse than you. And no matter what you think of him, he'll always stand his ground. Because that's who he is. The biker swallowed hard, the weight of Samuel's words settling over him. He took a step back, his bravado now fully replaced by unease. The crowd watched in silence, their collective judgment pressing down like a physical force. Max, sensing the tension ebbing, turned his head to nuzzle Samuel's hand. The simple gesture was a reminder of the bond they shared, a bond that had weathered storms far greater than this. For a moment, no one spoke. The biker stood frozen, torn between retreating and defending his actions. Samuel remained composed, his blind eyes fixed on the man who had dared to harm his companion. And Max, ever steady, stood at Samuel's side, a silent testament to courage and loyalty. The city noises seemed to fade into the background as the weight of the moment hung in the air. The biker, now visibly shaken, took another hesitant step back. I didn't mean to. I didn't know, he stammered, his voice barely audible. Samuel tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then, with a quiet sigh, he said, Maybe next time you'll think before you act. The biker hesitated, his gaze darting between Samuel, Max, and the crowd. Finally, without another word, he turned and hurried back to his bike, the engine roaring to life as he sped away. As the sound of the motorbike faded into the distance, the crowd began to disperse, though their murmurs lingered. Some approached Samuel to offer words of support, while others simply gave Max an approving nod. Samuel knelt beside Max, his hands resting on the dog's sturdy shoulders. Good boy, he said softly. Max licked his face in response, his tail wagging gently. But as the city returned to its usual rhythm, one thing was clear. The day's events had left an indelible mark, and the story of a blind man and his extraordinary dog was far from over. As the last of the crowd slowly dispersed, Samuel felt the weight of their stares lift, but the air still crackled with tension. Max, sensing his handler's unease, leaned closer to him, his golden fur brushing against Samuel's leg. The dog's calmness was a stark contrast to the storm brewing in Samuel's mind. The biker had left, but the encounter had left more questions than answers. Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger, something darker that was coming for them. Samuel turned back to the street, his senses still finely tuned to the world around him. He couldn't see the people or the cars, but he could hear the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of wind through trees, and the faint footsteps of pedestrians. The city was always alive, always moving, but today it felt different. There was a shadow hanging over the bustling streets, a shadow he couldn't quite understand, but that he could feel deep in his bones. Max, as always, kept his head high, his eyes scanning the environment, even though he couldn't see the world the way others did. The dog's intuition had saved them countless times, and Samuel trusted him more than anything. Still, a nagging thought lingered at the back of Samuel's mind. The biker hadn't been alone. Someone had been watching. Someone had seen what had happened and might be interested in Max and his past and the secrets he carried. Samuel had been careful, keeping Max's history a quiet one. But now that silence felt like a ticking clock, counting down to a moment he couldn't control. Max's past wasn't just filled with heroism, it was filled with danger. The things Max had witnessed in the war zones were beyond anything most people could fathom. And those who had trained him, those who had worked alongside him, didn't just vanish. They had their own connections, their own motives. Samuel had always been careful, keeping a low profile, never drawing attention to the dog's extraordinary abilities. But today, that had changed. The biker, with his casual cruelty, had unknowingly triggered something far more dangerous than he realized. Samuel took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had to stay focused. He needed to protect Max, not just from people like that biker, but from whatever was lurking in the shadows. He couldn't let the dog's past catch up to them. Not yet. Not now. But as they moved through the streets, a sense of unease settled over him. The world around them felt heavier, as if it was watching, waiting. Samuel's steps slowed. Max, sensing the shift in his handler's mood, stopped beside him, his body tense. The dog's instincts were never wrong. Then it happened. A car slowed beside them, its engine humming quietly as it came to a stop. The window rolled down, and Samuel's body tensed instinctively. The voice that came from inside was smooth, almost too smooth, like it belonged to someone who had spent years practicing the art of control. "Samuel," the voice said, calm but firm, "I think we need to talk." Max growled lowly, his hackles raised. The dog could smell something, a faint trace of familiarity mixed with danger. Samuel's grip on Max's harness tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "I don't know you," Samuel replied, though the name that slipped into his mind unbidden was one he couldn't ignore. His heart raced, though he kept his tone level. "What do you want?" The man in the car smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You don't remember me, do you? It's been a while." "But I remembered you, Samuel. I remembered you and your dog very well." Max's growl deepened, a sound filled with warning. Samuel's thoughts raced as he pieced together the few clues, his name, the voice, the unsettling familiarity. And then it hit him. This wasn't just someone from his past. This was someone from Max's. Someone who knew more about Max's history than Samuel ever wanted to admit. The man's smile widened, sensing Samuel's recognition. "Max and I used to be very close," he said, his voice dripping with something cold, something unsettling. "You see, Max wasn't just a soldier. He was part of something much bigger, something special. And that's why we're here now, to finish what we started." Samuel's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his composure. "If you've come looking for trouble, you found it." His voice was calm, but the words felt like they carried the weight of everything he had worked to protect. Max, sensing the tension, stood tall, his body vibrating with the same silent warning Samuel felt. The man's smile didn't falter. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Samuel. At least not yet. I'm here to remind you of something you've forgotten. You've been living in the shadows, hiding from the truth. But the truth always comes to light. And when it does..." He let the sentence hum in the air, unfinished. Max's growl grew louder, almost a roar now, as if he could sense the danger ahead. Samuel's grip tightened on the harness, but he didn't move. "Whatever you want, it's not going to happen. Not today." The man leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable. "We'll see about that," he said softly, before signaling the driver to pull away. The car began to roll slowly down the street, its engine powering like a predator circling its prey. Samuel stood there for a moment, frozen, the weight of the encounter settling over him like a heavy fog. He could feel the eyes of the people around him, the whispers of curiosity and suspicion. But none of that mattered. What mattered now was that he and Max were in danger, and this time it wasn't just some random biker. It was someone who knew their history, someone who was part of the dark past Samuel had hoped to leave behind. Max, ever the sentinel, stayed close, his body pressed against Samuel's side, as if to offer silent reassurance. But Samuel knew better. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning of something much darker, and they were right in the center of it. As the car disappeared around the corner, Samuel's mind raced. Who was the man in the car? What did he know about Max's past that Samuel didn't? And why had he decided to show up now, after all these years? Samuel's thoughts were interrupted by a soft nudge from Max, reminding him that they couldn't stay here forever. They had to move to stay ahead of whatever was coming. But as they continued down the street, the weight of the encounter felt like a shadow following them, growing ever closer. The question now wasn't just about surviving the day. It was about surviving what was coming next. As Samuel and Max continued walking, the feeling of being watched lingered in the pit of his stomach. It wasn't just the usual paranoia he'd grown used to over the years. It was something sharper, something colder, something more deliberate. Every turn, every corner, every passing face felt like part of a carefully orchestrated game, and Samuel and Max were the pawns. The streets, once so familiar, now seemed foreign to Samuel. He could no longer rely on his intuition, the sense that had always guided him through life. Today, it was as if the world itself had become an unpredictable force, pulling and twisting around him. His senses were on edge, attuned to every sound, every movement. Max, too, seemed restless, his ears twitching at the slightest noise, his body tense as if anticipating an attack. They turned a corner and Samuel froze. He didn't need to see the man in the car to know he was near. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and the blood drained from his face. It was the unmistakable feeling of being trapped, of being cornered. He could feel it in his bones, a cold certainty that whatever was coming next would change everything. Max whined softly, nudging Samuel's leg with his nose. The dog's instinct was sharper than ever, and Samuel knew that Max was feeling it too. The danger, the threat, the promise of something terrible just beyond the horizon. But Samuel couldn't let fear take control. He had to stay composed. For Max, for himself. They continued walking, their pace quickening, the tension building with each step. But no matter how fast they moved, they couldn't outrun the feeling of being hunted. Samuel's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. Who was the man in the car? Why had he come? And what did he mean by finishing what they started? The more Samuel thought about it, the more certain he became that this wasn't just about Max's past. It was about something much bigger. Someone was pulling the strings, someone who knew everything about Max's training, his missions, his abilities. And if they were willing to show up now, after all these years, it meant they had been waiting, watching, planning. Max stopped suddenly, his head turning, as if he'd sensed something Samuel had missed. His ears were perked, his body rigid. Samuel followed the dog's gaze and saw nothing, just a street empty of life, save for the occasional passerby. But something in the air had shifted. The street felt wrong. The city around them felt wrong. Then a sound broke the silence, a soft click. It was barely audible, but it was enough to make Samuel's heart skip a beat. He knew that sound. It was the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Max growled low in his throat, his body now trembling with anticipation. Samuel's hand shot to his side, where his own weapon was concealed. But he didn't draw it. Not yet. He needed to know who was out there, what they wanted, and how far they were willing to go. The click came again, followed by the soft scrape of boots on concrete. Then a voice, calm and steady, echoed through the empty street. Samuel, the voice said, the same smooth, unsettling tone from the car earlier. You can't run forever. Samuel's grip tightened on Max's harness as he scanned the street, his pulse racing. He couldn't see the man, couldn't find him in the sea of empty faces, but he knew he was close. The man was toying with them, playing some twisted game with their lives. And the more Samuel thought about it, the more he realized that the stakes had never been higher. The man's words weren't just empty threats. He had a plan. A plan that involved Max. And a plan that, if left unchecked, would destroy everything Samuel had worked to protect. Max's growl grew louder, more insistent, and Samuel instinctively stepped in front of him, positioning himself between the dog and whatever danger lurked in the shadows. He had to protect Max. He couldn't let anyone take him, not after everything they'd been through together. The voice continued, this time closer, as if the man had moved in behind them. You think you can keep running, Samuel. You think you can keep hiding from the truth. We're not so easy to escape. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest. He knew the man wasn't talking about the dog. He was talking about Samuel himself. The man knew things about Samuel's past, things that no one should know. And that was what made him dangerous. That was what made him unstoppable. But Samuel wasn't about to give up. Not now. Not when he was so close to uncovering the truth. He turned slowly, his hand still resting on his concealed weapon, his eyes scanning the street. He didn't know where the man was, but he could feel his presence like a dark cloud hovering just out of sight. Max was on edge, his body coiled like a spring, ready to pounce at a moment's notice. Samuel's thoughts were moving faster now, racing through possibilities, trying to anticipate every move the man might make. And then he remembered something, a detail he had almost overlooked. The man in the car had said something that had stuck with him. Max and I used to be very close. That sentence lingered in Samuel's mind like a weight he couldn't shake. What did it mean? How was the man connected to Max's past? What had happened between them that had driven the man to seek out Max now, years later? Before Samuel could process the thought, a figure stepped out of the shadows just beyond the reach of the streetlights. The man. He was tall, his features hidden beneath the brim of a dark hat, his hands folded calmly at his sides. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched Samuel and Max, as if waiting for something. And in that moment, Samuel knew that the time for games was over. Whatever the man wanted, whatever dark secrets lay between them, Samuel was ready. The tension was unbearable, and the streets felt like a trap closing in. But there was no escape. Not now. The man's lips curled into a smile, and for the first time Samuel saw the truth of what was happening. The game had changed. The stakes were higher, and Max's past was about to catch up with them in a way neither of them could have ever imagined.